Welcome to Raised on D&D podcast. Each month, Raised on D&D brings you inspirational interviews with tips and strategies to enrich your family's gaming experience.
Your host for Raised on D&D has been a game master for 30 years and father to 3 gamers. Here is Nick Cardarelli.
Welcome back, gamers. I'm your host, Nick Cardarelli, and this is Raised on D&D. My next guest is from Metro Detroit, Michigan. She connects parents, caregivers, and educators with the resources to introduce tabletop role-playing games to children with her blog, TTRPGkids.com. She has researched over 230 games, providing reviews and resources on her website. She's the creator of StoryGuider TTRPG. Please welcome Stephanie Campbell. Hi, Steph.
Hello. Thank you for having me on.
Oh, thanks for being on the show. Stephanie, we're so excited with all the things that you're doing on your blog and with StoryGuider, all of this stuff that's been happening over the last year. But before we jump into all of that, can you take us back to your first experience with tabletop role-playing games, where your love for Dungeons and Dragons began?
So my first experience was actually a one-shot that a friend of the family had started running. My husband was getting involved in it, and they ended up spilling into an extra session. So they invited me along for that second session, and I absolutely loved it. It was amazing. I basically played like an artificer ranger who was Aloy from Horizon Zero Dawn, and I had an absolute blast. But then it ended because it was a one-shot, and we didn't pick it back up again for a few years. And eventually my brother got me hooked on Critical Role. So that snowballed into, I just kind of decided to DM and rolled into it.
Wow. So you just jumped right behind the screen and was like, I'm ready to do this. Let me try this out. So when you first started dungeon mastering, was that friends? Was that family? Where'd you start off with that?
So it was mostly family members. There was my 2 brothers, my sister, my cousin, my sister's friend, and my husband. So it was a pretty big group. And out of that group, I think my sister and my sister's friend were the only 2 that had played Dungeons and Dragons before. So new DM, lots of new players, but it was a lot of fun. So I enjoyed it.
That's fantastic. And you're not just a gamer, you're a mom and a wife. And you mentioned your husband plays, but do you play with your children as well?
Yeah. So one of the big things that I really push is playing tabletop RPGs with kids. And I definitely play them with my son. I started when he was about 2.5 years old, doing what I like to call interactive story time, and slowly transitioned that into systems that had some, like, mild rules mechanics and a little bit more depth into the story and things like that. He's about 3.5 now, and he loves them. He picks games up so quickly now. I try out a new one with him at least once a month. And he adapts so well to the new mechanics now because he's just been used to playing so many different ones. It's been a lot of fun.
That is phenomenal. You're looking into these RPGs and you research them and you get copies of them, and then you say, let me try them out with the family. What came first, really? The blog or the gaming? How did that all happen?
The gaming started first. That was probably about January of 2021. I really started getting into it with him, with the interactive story time. And after a few months, I was like, there's a lot of parents out there that are trying to find material for gaming with their kids, but they keep saying that they're having a hard time finding it. And then there's a whole bunch of creators who have made a bunch of awesome content, but it took a while to dig around and find that. And there wasn't really one place to kind of get both of those groups together consistently. So you can always put like a call out on Twitter or something and ask, do you have any recommendations? You get a whole bunch of different responses. But every time you ask that question, it's a different set of responses and different people. And there's a lot of knowledge out there, but it was kind of all over the place. So I, one, saw that there was maybe a need for this and wanted to do something about it. And two, I really wanted a project. So I had left my job as an engineer in January 2021, due largely to situation with COVID. And
I'm sorry.
Yeah, it happens. So, we've been managing, but I needed to kind of fill some of that gap because it was like a 60-hour-a-week plus job. And I was really into it and everything. So I sort of took like engineering brain and then seeing this need for tabletop RPGs for kids and all that information, and just kind of went to work and made the blog. So,
well, and what I love about the blog is not only are there game reviews, but you got interviews with creators, you've got links to resources, all that stuff is in one place now. And I've got to tell you, as a homeschooling parent, I love finding that hub on the internet where all the resources are in one place, because like you said, there's a lot of time of research involved trying to find it, asking for recommendations. You already have said, it's a roll of the dice and you get all kinds of stuff every different time. And, so having to keep up with that is very difficult. Also, my children are a little bit older, so we've been playing tabletop role-playing games with them now for 11 years. And way back then, there wasn't as much great content for tabletop role-playing games with children. And so we had to water down like 3.5 D&D and Pathfinder and things like that, until games like Hero Kids and Mermaid Adventures and Amazing Tales started pouring out. And then those kind of games were there and available for us here at home. But the fact that TTRPGkids.com has all those resources in one place, it just makes it so great. And it's so good, especially because I'm asked all the time, hey, where can I find a kids RPG for my 3-year-old, my 5-year-old, and we're past those points now, me and my family, we're into 5e, we're into Call of Cthulhu, we're into Star Wars, we're there now. It is so great, Stephanie, to be able to say to my friends, you got to check out TTRPGkids.com, because all your answers are right there at a click of a button, organized so well. So Stephanie, thank you so much for that. Now, on top of that, though, you've gone even further. You've actually created your own tabletop role-playing game for young children called StoryGuider. Now, can you talk to us a little bit about StoryGuider? Tell us what that's all about.
Yeah. So StoryGuider started out with me wanting to have a quick system for creating a story to play out with my son. There's no dice mechanics because I didn't want to be giving a 2-year-old dice.
They can be choking hazards.
Right.
Absolutely.
They stick everything in their mouth. So I didn't want to have there be dice, but there's challenges. It's, do you want the dragon to go here or here? What do you think they should do? And I started incorporating little like social, emotional, educational tidbits in there. And eventually a pre-K teacher came across my games and asked if I would make games to align with their weekly social, emotional curriculum.
Wow.
So now I'm coming out with a weekly StoryGuider game that aligns with the skills that they're teaching in the classroom. So right now, as of December 30th, 2021, there are 21 StoryGuider games released. And I have probably another 8 that's going to be released as part of the rest of the curriculum. And all of them include, this is how you ask friends to play with you. This is what you're supposed to do if you're mad. This is how you identify if you're feeling scared. But it's spun in a way that's fun. So one of the ones I released recently, it was the Betty the Yeti series. So my son likes Yetis. I'm not sure exactly why. We told him a story about them and he wanted to play hide and seek with a snowman monster. So I'm like, okay, well, that's a Yeti. And we made the Betty the Yeti series, and Betty the Yeti is super shy and is nervous about joining in on the Winter Festival. So they keep hiding in different places, and the other animals are trying to get Betty to join in, but Betty's like really nervous. So it talks about how to identify feelings of nervousness, how to get over that, what happens if you make a mistake. And it's all in one game. It covers all those topics, but it's fun. And it kept my kid busy for about 40 minutes. So there's kind of, I made it to help one with the classroom and giving them a fun way to introduce these concepts to the kids in the class. It's also for my kid. With the COVID lockdown, there's a lot of, it's kind of hard to set up regular play dates. Mm-hmm. So it helps me to teach him a lot of these concepts and play act it with him so he can learn this still. And then it's also there to help other parents, caregivers, if you're babysitting for a family member and you're not really sure what to do with their kids, you can pull one of these out. So I've had a few people come to me about that. Like, there's kids coming to my house over the holidays. What do I do? So, I sent them a copy and they played with it and had a lot of fun. I was happy to kind of provide that. So, it's just there to have fun, introduce some educational elements if you want, and to give something quick that you can kind of pick up, doesn't take a lot of prep, and just have fun with your kids.
Now, I know there are 21 adventures for StoryGuider already, and more coming out. Where can people find the StoryGuider adventures?
So they're all on the TTRPGkids itch.io page, and there's links to it in the blog. So if you go to the TTRPGkids.com blog and go to the games list, you can search for them and it's got all the links there.
And that's fantastic. And I love that one of the recent ones that you did had to do with the chef and actually doing recipes with kids. Even now with my teens, they love getting in the kitchen, learning how to cook, things like that. And I was just looking at that and I was like, oh, that's wonderful. And then my middle son, he just got a telescope for Christmas and he's super excited about astronomy, and you have an astronaut game as well. And so we were looking at those things and I was like, wow, these are wonderful. And the fact that they have these educational elements and these social training elements just takes it to a whole other level, and makes it, what I love is that it makes it usable, like you said, babysitters, caregivers, educators. And that's what's so great is with Raised on D&D podcast, we've had all kinds of folks on the show, parents and educators, librarians, doctors, all these folks. And we've all kind of come together. And I think it's so amazing that tabletop role-playing games are being utilized in so many different ways to help children and to help families. The blog is amazing. You're rolling out new games for StoryGuider constantly, and you're bringing more attention to creators of RPGs for kids. It's all around incredible. What are we looking forward to moving forward into the new year? We're starting 2022. What are some of the goals and ideas that you have for TTRPGkids moving forward?
So after I finish out the StoryGuider curriculum, I have a whole bunch of different ideas for more games. I keep making this list. So, ones that incorporate engineering concepts by profession. I'm an engineer, so I want to kind of roll some of that into there. Ones that I introduce, like different ways of learning probability and getting used to really simple mechanics that don't involve dice. So stuff like drawing tokens out of a cup, printable sheet, nice and easy. You can, you don't need any extra materials other than a printer, and super easy to set up, no choking hazards kind of games. So things that you can introduce to really young kids. I want to expand on that past StoryGuider. So StoryGuider is kind of like level 1, and then kind of going into, level 2, level 3, making it a little bit more complicated. So it sort of grows with my kid and then also with everyone else's. I also am getting a flood of requests for interviews and game reviews. And it's amazing because this started out with me going to people and being like, hey, can I review your game? Are you okay with this? And now it's like flip the other way around. So I'm really excited to participate with this whole community and get a variety of guests in. There's people with like backgrounds in therapy and education, in addition to game creators and parents that I'm hoping to get on for 2022. I've also been talking with a few people about collaborations. So article swaps, working on some collaborations within a Kickstarter and a few other things. It's really exciting. So it's just, I've been like overflowing with excitement about this because it just kind of took off all of a sudden. And I'm having a lot of fun working on it.
And that's wonderful. I love that about the gaming community. I love that about us. I would say 90% of the gaming community, nobody treats each other like this is competition. Like everybody wants to work with each other. Everyone wants to help each other out. It's got this big extended family feel. And it's so great. The more we connect with other creators, the more intimate the community becomes. And I think that's wonderful. And Stephanie, you being part of the hub of that wheel of bringing these creators together is just amazing. So thank you so much for that. Can you give our listeners some advice? Because a lot of things that I hear from parents is my children are too young, and they're like, how can I introduce role-playing games to my young children? What are your advice for those parents to help them get those young preschoolers down at the table?
So the way that I look at it is when you take a tabletop RPG, at its core, what you're doing is telling a story together. You don't need it to be complicated. What I did with my son, he was 2.5, we just told a story together. So it was the wizard got an invitation to go to the king's castle and perform for the king's birthday. So now the wizard is walking down the path. Do they want to go to the left or the right? The left goes to the scary forest. The right goes across a lake. Which one do you want to go through? And then he would pick one. And then we would grow the story from there. And you don't have to have dice rolls. You can if you want to. But start out with telling a story together. Give your child choices. Let them pick where the story wants to go. And that gets them into role playing and developing that creative side that's needed for these games. And once they get a little comfortable for that and they're like, oh, mom and dad aren't just reading me a book, I'm doing the story, they start coming up with it on their own. And the stuff my child comes up with, it's wild and amazing. And I love it. And he tells me stories now constantly, and it's beautiful. So, I was talking about earlier, he wanted to play hide and seek with a snow monster. So then, we tell him about Yetis and make up this story where there's this shy Yeti that's kind of hanging out around. And we found some books about Yetis and things like that. And it became this really cool kind of little focal point for him for a while. When Halloween came around, he's seeing all these scary Halloween decorations because, the neighbors put them up in their yard and things like that. But instead of getting freaked out by it, he started telling stories about dancing skeletons. And he was able to use that to kind of cope. So I guess my core piece of advice is if your kids are really young, don't bog them down with mechanics. Let them just tell a story with you and be able to facilitate that. And you can slowly add the mechanics in over time. we started out with the stories, and then I wanted to start adding some randomization. I taught him, this is a die. Here's how you count to 6. Roll it. We'll see what happens. We got the big chunky ones that he can't stick in his mouth. And we just kind of started with that and had a lot of fun.
That's great. And you're absolutely right. I know that that's where it started for my family, was story time, and story time quickly got out of control. They not only wanted their favorite characters from their favorite shows, but then they started wanting crossovers. The next thing I know, I've got the Scooby Gang and the bridge crew from Star Trek interacting. Then they're putting themselves in the story, and they're telling me how the story is going to go. And what I think that started to happen is when I went, you know what? We're basically role playing at this point. Yeah. And we might be ready for the table. And we started real early too. And that's great. But that's wonderful advice, is just start with stories. And I think one of the things that surprised me and delighted me was when I interviewed my daughter in the very first episode of Raised on D&D, she mentions how being given those choices was so amazing to her at 4 years old, at 6 years old, at 8 years old, because for children, their whole lives are dictated to them: what to wear, what to eat, when to go to bed. Whether that's at home or in school, they're constantly being told, this is what, do this, don't do that. And to be able to be given the freedom of tabletop role-playing games to where they get to make the decisions and get the choices, and they can go in any direction they want, I think it's a luxury that we as adults kind of take for granted. Mm-hmm. But for them, it wasn't lost. Stephanie, thank you so much. Amazing stuff coming from your blog, from your games. Great things coming up in 2022, and we're looking forward to it. I can't wait to download Betty the Yeti. I just want to see it myself, and just the concepts. I have younger nieces and nephews. I have friends with younger children, and I'm like, if I could have a few story guiders on deck, just ready to go to help out. My daughter actually now is a certified through the Red Cross babysitter. And so I know that the idea of taking those with her to entertain children for 30, 45 minutes is going to be a huge help. So Stephanie, thank you so much. Thank you for your contribution to the gaming community. Thank you for all you're doing to help our community get better, and helping parents, but also thank you for being on the show today.
Yeah. And thank you for having me. It was awesome getting to chat. And I love talking with other parents who are into D&D and tabletop RPGs with their kids. So this was great. So appreciate it.